It was the kind of southern morning where the dew clung to the grass like secrets left untold. Clara May Henderson stood barefoot on the wooden porch of the farmhouse her family had owned for nearly a century, sipping coffee from a chipped mug that once belonged to her grandmother. The air was heavy with the scent of magnolia and sun-warmed earth. Today wasn't supposed to be special, just another Saturday. But fate had other plans. Her father had passed away 6 months earlier, and Clara had been slowly sorting through the barn and storage sheds, trying to decide what to keep and what to let go. Most of it was old tools, rusted farm equipment, and yellowed newspaper clippings. But behind a wall of wooden crates and a broken plow, she found a trunk. It was heavy, metal reinforced, with leather straps cracked and curling like old parchment. The initials TR were burned into the side in fading script. Curious, she brushed off a layer of dust and pried it open. Inside, time had stood still. There were carefully folded uniforms, their khaki fabric preserved almost eerily well. A stack of letters, bound in a ribbon now dulled to grey, sat neatly. In one corner, and nestled beneath a faded US flag, was a metal purple, with the profile of George Washington in the center. A purple heart. Clara froze. She wasn't a military historian, but she knew what that medal meant. Someone in her family had been wounded or killed in service to their country. She'd never heard of anyone named TR in the family. Not in any of the old stories, not in the family Bible where births and deaths were written in elegant cursive. She pulled the letters out with trembling hands. The first was dated August 1944 and was addressed to Miss Lillian Rayner. The return address read, Private Thomas Rayner, 1st Marine Division, Camp Pendleton, California. Her heart beat faster. Thomas Rayner. That was the TR. She read the letter aloud, barely hearing her own voice over the pounding in her ears. Dearest Lillian, I leave tomorrow for a place I can't name, but know that I carry your photograph in my breast pocket and your love in my heart. If anything happens to me, tell my baby sister she was the best part of growing up. Forever yours, Tommy, baby sister. Clara blinked. Was this her grandmother? But her grandmother had never mentioned a brother, not once. She searched deeper into the trunk and found a small black and white photograph of a young man in uniform, smiling with boyish pride. On the back was written, Tommy, 1943, before shipping out, love, Lil. It was like a ghost had risen from the dust. Clara placed the medal in her palm and felt its cool weight settle in. Whoever Tommy was, he had gone to war, possibly died, and had been forgotten or maybe hidden within the walls of this family home. She felt a sudden responsibility. She needed to know more. The next morning, she visited the local library, where an elderly historian named Mr. Everett still volunteered in the archives. When she showed him the medal and the photo, he leaned forward with wide eyes. Peleliu, he whispered. Your man was likely at Peleliu. That was one of the bloodiest battles in the Pacific. Many Marines went missing there. Do you think he died there? Clara asked softly. Maybe. Or maybe he disappeared. Some were never found. The name Thomas Rayner wasn't in the county records, but in the National Military Database, Mr. Everett found a missing in action report from 1944. Private Thomas Rayner, age 22, from Montgomery County, Alabama. Declared Mia after the Battle of Peleliu. Clara's hands trembled. She had uncovered a chapter of her family's history that no one had spoken of for decades. A young man who had left for war and never returned and whose name had been swallowed by silence. And now, 60 years later, his memory had come back in the form of a dusty trunk and a single shining medal. The scent of old paper filled Clara's truck as she drove back from the Montgomery County Historical Society. The stack of copied documents and letters buckled into the passenger seat like a silent companion. She had barely slept the night before. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the boyish face of Tommy Rayner smiling from that yellowed photograph, unaware that his life would be swallowed by a jungle half a world away. Back at the farmhouse, Clara spread the materials across the kitchen table. She had notes from the archivist, a copy of the MIA report, and, most hauntingly, a telegram addressed to her great-grandmother, Lillian Rayner's mother. It read, We regret to inform you that Private Thomas Rayner has been declared missing in action during combat operations in the Pacific Theater. Further updates will be provided when available. There had never been a followed-up. Clara now understood why her grandmother had never mentioned him. The pain of a brother who never came home. The silence imposed by grief and war. Perhaps it was easier for Lillian. to bury his memory than live with the hope that never resolved into closure. But Clara couldn't let it go. The next morning, she drove 2 hours to Birmingham to meet a military researcher, Dr. Gwen Hartford, who specialized in World War II MIA cases. Gwen was a slight woman with sharp eyes and shelves full of warrior memorabilia behind her desk. Peleliu is infamous, Gwen said after reviewing the file. It was chaotic, especially for the Marines. Thick jungle, caves, heat. Thousands died in the first days alone. Records from that time are inconsistent. She paused, then turned her monitor toward Clara. I found something, Gwen said. Look here. It was a faded page from a 1944 field report. Among dozens of names scrawled in rushed handwriting was PVT. Thomas Rayner, last seen near White Beach 2. What's White Beach 2? Clara asked. One of the landing zones on Peleliu. He was probably part of the first assault. If he went missing there, it was likely on the very first day, September 15th, 1944. Clara stared at the screen, imagining the beach, the smoke, the noise. A young man from Alabama thrust into the heart of hell. Do you think is there any chance he survived? She asked. Gwen hesitated. Some did. A few were captured, others deserted, but most simply vanished. If a body wasn't recovered, they were declared MIA and later presumed dead. Clara nodded slowly. I want to go there, she said suddenly. To Peleliu. Gwen blinked. That's ambitious. I need to see it. I want to walk where he walked. Maybe find something. The researcher studied her for a moment, then reached for a folder. Then we'll need to get you in touch with the Marine Corps, Historical Division, and the Defense POWAI Accounting Agency. They can advise you on access, safety, and maybe, just maybe, they can reopen the case. Clara felt the fire inside her catch. What had started as a quiet day in the barn was now turning into a mission. She didn't know if she'd find anything, but for the first time in decades, someone would be searching for Tommy Rayner again. Later that night, back at the farmhouse, she held his purple heart again. The cool metal rested against her palm, almost like a whisper from another world. She whispered back, I'm coming for you, Tommy. By the time Clara stepped onto the tarmac of Roman Tematical International Airport in Palau, the humid air wrapped around her like a wet blanket. It was a world away from Alabama's crisp autumn. Her body was exhausted, but her mind raced. The last 3 weeks had been consumed with emails, paperwork, phone calls, and arrangements. She had secured a local guide and a special clearance from the Palauan government, with assistance from a contact at the US Department of Defense. Her guide, a quiet man named Toure, met her with a worn jeep and a cooler of bottled water. You're here about a soldier? He asked in halting English. Clara nodded. My great-uncle, he vanished here in 1944. Toure gave a solemn nod. Many spirits in Peleliu, some still waiting. The next morning, they boarded a boat to the island. From a distance, Peleliu looked like any other Pacific paradise: lush, green trees, sandy beaches, and cerulean waters. But as they docked, the reality settled in. The beach was silent, unnervingly so. The jungle loomed behind, thick and dark. Toure led her through narrow trails, past rusted tanks overtaken by vines, and bomb craters filled with stagnant water. Time had not erased the war. It had only buried it under roots and memories. They reached White Beach by midday. This is where the Marines came, Toure said, pointing to the narrow strip of sand flanked by jagged coral. Very dangerous. Many died. Clara crouched near a large tree root, her fingers brushing the sand. The breeze rustled the leaves above, but otherwise, the jungle was eerily quiet. She closed her eyes and imagined the chaos screams, explosions, the thunder of bullets slicing through palm trees. Somewhere here, Tommy had disappeared. She opened a small notebook and read aloud the report. Private Thomas Rayner, last seen advancing past the eastern ridge, carrying radio equipment. Status, missing in action. Toure gestured to a ridge. Inland, there are caves. Maybe we go tomorrow. Today we rest. They made camp near the beach. That night, Clara sat by the fire, cradling the purple heart. She noticed Toure watching her. You feel him? He asked softly. Clara looked up. I don't know what I feel. Sadness, guilt, curiosity, hope, maybe. He nodded. Sometimes, people disappear, but stories stay. Maybe story is what you need. His words lingered in her mind. She had grown up without any stories about Tommy. It was like he had been erased from her family's narrative. But here, standing on the very soil where he was last seen. She felt the gravity of his life and his silence. In the distance, waves crashed against the coral. Clara lay in her tent, staring at the stars through the mesh window. Somewhere, in this dense, haunted island, a piece of her history was waiting to be uncovered. And in that moment, she vowed she would not leave without it. By sunrise, Clara was already up, stuffing her backpack with water, a flashlight, extra batteries, and a copy of Tommy's last known coordinates. Touré emerged from his tent wordlessly, nodding in approval as he slung a machete over his shoulder. The air was dense with moisture, and birdsong echoed eerily through the jungle canopy. They hiked for over an hour, deeper into the heart of Peleliu. Clara's boots sank into the soft, mossy ground, and giant ferns brushed against her arms. Every so often, Touré stopped and cleared overgrown vines or pointed out remnants of rusted helmets and ammunition, silent witnesses of the brutal past. Finally, they reached a limestone ridge jagged with natural openings. One cavern, half covered by a fallen palm trunk, caught Touré's eye. "This one," he said, his voice low. "Many soldiers hid here. Some never came out." Clara switched on her flashlight and ducked inside. The cave was narrow at first, then widened into a cold, hollow chamber. The floor was uneven and slick, and the air carried a damp metallic smell like rust and time. Her heart pounded. Every footstep echoed. She paused by a corner where the rock wall was blackened, perhaps by an explosion or a fire. A faint crunch under her boot made her freeze. She crouched and saw it, a rusted dog tag half buried in the dirt. With trembling fingers, she pulled it out and brushed it clean. Rainer, TJ, her breath caught. It was real. She stumbled backward, sitting on a large rock as the tears came. And sudden, it was the first tangible proof she'd ever held that Tommy had been here, that he had not just vanished into thin air, not just become another name on a wall. Touré entered quietly and sat beside her. "You found him," he said gently. Clara shook her head. "Not yet, but this is a beginning." She took out a small evidence bag and sealed the tag. As she stood to explore further, Touré pointed toward a darker recess of the cavern. "There's more back there." Crawling on her hands and knees, Clara entered the narrow passage. Her flashlight flickered over discarded gear canteens, ration tins, a broken rifle. Then she saw it, a small bundle of letters tied with string, wedged behind a rock. The paper was yellowed and brittle, but still legible. She recognized the handwriting from old family recipes kept by her grandmother. It was Tommy's "Dear Ma." The first one began, "I don't know if I'll ever leave this island." Her hands shook as she read the rest. The letters weren't just battlefield updates, they were reflections, confessions, fears, and at the bottom of the last one, a sketch, a girl holding a locket, his little sister, her grandmother. Clara clutched the pages to her chest and closed her eyes. For the first time in her life, she heard his voice. He had never been truly gone, only waiting to be found. Back at the makeshift tent they had set up near the limestone ridge, Clara laid the bundle of letters out carefully on a blanket, her hands almost reverent in every movement. The jungle air was sticky and heavy, but her skin prickled from something else, an electricity that buzzed in her chest. Touré sat across from her, watching in respectful silence as she unfolded the pages one by one, reading Tommy's words aloud. "Dear Ma, it's been 3 days since we lost contact with the others. Food is low, water's nearly gone. But what I can't stop thinking about is Clara's picture tucked in my shirt pocket. I promised I'd take care of it. If someone finds these letters, please tell her I kept that promise." Clara paused, her voice cracking, her eyes filled with tears that she didn't wipe away. She let them fall silently on the letters, like rain finding its way home. "He wrote these ... thinking of me," she murmured. "Thinking of all of you," Touré said. "You gave him something to hold on to." One letter, in particular, was different. It was shorter, written in hurried script, with smudges Clara knew were fingerprints, not time stains. "They're getting close. I can hear boots above us. If I don't make it out, and if these caves are ever found ... tell my story. Not because I was a hero, but because I was a brother, a son, a person who loved, who feared, who tried." It wasn't just a letter, it was a final breath. Clara folded it back slowly and stared at the opening of the cavern behind her, the silence beyond it, pressing like a weight. There were no remains, no bones, but these words were as alive as if they'd just been written. Later that evening, they hiked back to the village, where an old Chamorro man awaited them a local historian Toure had called for. When Clara showed him the dog tag and the letters, his eyes widened. "This man," he said, voice hoarse, "was listed on our missing in action registry. His name is here, but no one ever found a trace. Until now." They sat around the flickering light of an oil lamp as he translated a few old reports, combat notes, civilian sightings, cave discoveries over the decades. It all pointed to the same truth. Tommy Rayner had survived the initial attack. He had hidden, he had written, and then vanished. The historian looked up from his notes and said, "It's possible, Miss Clara, that your great-uncle saved the lives of others. Some Chamorro families remember a wounded American soldier guiding children to safety. Back then, they never knew his name." Clara stared into the flames, absorbing every word. He hadn't just disappeared, he had lived, he had mattered. Clara woke before dawn. The jungle outside still cloaked in darkness. Crickets hummed in rhythmic pulses, and a distant owl cried into the pre-dawn stillness. She sat up in the cot provided by the villagers. Tommy's letters clutched to her chest, still unwilling to let them go. As the first light crept through the canopy, she joined Toure and the local historian near the edge of the forest. Today, they would visit the nearby memorial grounds, where names of missing American soldiers had been carved into stone-etched tributes for those never found. Toure walked ahead, machete in hand, clearing a narrow trail long swallowed by time. The forest seemed to hush around them, as though holding its breath for what was to come. After a steep climb and a quiet, sweaty hour, they reached a clearing where a single granite monument stood. Moss had begun to claim the edges, but the names were still legible. Clara ran her fingers over the smooth surface, scanning the list with trembling hands. And there he was, Thomas Rayner, U.S. Army Infantry, missing 1944. She whispered his name as though summoning a ghost. For the first time since arriving, she let herself cry openly, not just for him, but for the years stolen, the silence endured, the unanswered prayers of a family that never truly healed. The historian pulled out a photograph from his pocket, an aged black and white image of a local family from the 1940s. In the corner stood a young man in uniform, half his face in shadow. "I believe this is your uncle," he said quietly. "He helped this family escape through the caves. They survived because of him." Clara studied the photo. It wasn't clear, not really, but the eyes, they bore the same softness, the same weight of responsibility she saw in her brothers. She nodded. "It's him." Suddenly, the jungle didn't feel so heavy. The silence didn't feel like loss, it felt like presence. Before leaving, Clara knelt by the monument and placed one of Tommy's letters at its base, securing it with a small stone. She had already scanned and archived them, shared them with the military, ensured he'd be remembered. But this was for the earth, the island, and the spirits that had held on to him all these years. Back in the village, word spread. Quickly, children came to see the foreign woman who had found her ancestor, who had brought a name back to life. They sat around her that evening, listening as she read one of Tommy's lighter letters, aloud, the one about fishing with his brother, about sneaking peaches from his neighbor's orchard, about dancing once at a barn party in Missouri. Laughter filled the air. His voice through her was no longer a whisper in a cave. He had returned home in the only way left. Back in Missouri, the Rayner farmhouse stood just as Clara remembered. White paint peeling, porch swing creaking with the breeze, and the scent of honeysuckle lingering from the vine that had survived every storm. Her father had passed a decade ago, her mother even earlier, but the house still belonged to the family, lovingly maintained by her cousin Matt. Clara walked through the creaky front door, the worn wooden floor greeting her like an old friend. In her hands, she held a copy of Tommy's final letter, that one he'd written days before he vanished. It had been found wedged behind a rock in the cave, protected from moisture, time, and even insects, as if the earth had been saving it for her. She sat down at the kitchen table, where her grandmother used to shell peas and hum church hymns. The letter, in Tommy's neat block handwriting, read, "Clara, if this reaches you, know that I did what I had to do. I couldn't leave those people behind, not with danger so near. I'm not afraid. I just want you all to know I thought of you every day. Mama, Dad, little Charlie, and you, always you. There's a little girl here named Hannah. She reminds me of you when you were small. She's stubborn and kind and can climb trees faster than any boy. I think God sent her so I wouldn't forget why I came. Don't cry if I don't make it back. Just live a life that honors kindness. That's all I ever wanted. Love always, Tommy." By the time she finished reading, Clara was no longer alone. Matt had joined her, silent, his eyes red. He placed an old photo album on the table, opened to a page from 1943. There, among the yellowed pages, was Tommy's graduation picture, smiling, proud, a fresh start ahead of him, frozen in time. That evening, the family held a small memorial in the backyard. No pomp, no uniform ceremony, just close family, candles, and music Tommy loved. Clara spoke about his courage, not just as a soldier, but as a brother, as a man who never stopped protecting others. Then, in the soft twilight, Clara placed his letter in a wooden frame next to the photo, under a tree where her grandmother used to sit and tell stories. Tommy had finally come home, not in body, but in memory, in truth, in voice, and through Clara's journey, he was no longer lost, he was found. Years passed, but Tommy Rayner's story continued to inspire. Clara eventually published a memoir detailing the journey, a tribute not just to her uncle, but to all those who had vanished in silence, leaving echoes behind. The book became required reading in local high schools. A bronze plaque was placed near the island where his name was carved, honoring his courage, and that little letter, it remained in the family home, framed on the wall, a symbol of sacrifice, of faith, and of how far love can carry a name through time. If this story moved you, leave a comment below. Tell us, have you ever discovered something that changed how you see your family's past? Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share this story to help others remember those who were never forgotten. Because sometimes, the smallest letter holds the greatest truth.